You have questions? We have answers. Welcome to the Therapist Question Box with your host, Miss Lindsay Schiss.
Welcome back to another episode of the Therapist Question Box. We are here to answer your tough questions, so ask away. Today I have with me Grant Held, who is the clinical director at Therapy Utah. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Happy to have you back.
Glad to be back.
It's interesting. This question today is about motivation. And it's funny because as I was driving here, I was thinking, you know what? I don't think Grant ever lacks motivation. Is that true?
No.
You do sometimes.
Yeah. I think everybody does.
I think you're right. But I see you in meetings and it's like you're always kind of going above and beyond. So maybe in work.
Well, thanks.
But no, I do see that. But I agree with you. Everybody does at times, right?
Yeah.
And that's our question today. Our listener asked about just motivation. And we'll just go ahead and jump right in. The question is, how do I get my motivation back? And how can I be interested in life again? So really interesting questions. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts initially when you hear that?
It's a great question. So my initial thought is with motivation, it's an emotional experience. And I want to jump right into that because if there's one takeaway today, that's a big one. So I may not start there. So if you think about it, I almost thought about bringing, if our listeners have ever seen this, the emotion wheel, and just showing that motivation is one of those emotions that shows up on that emotion wheel.
To explain what the emotion wheel is.
So the emotion wheel starts with 5 to 6. Usually it depends on the version of the emotion wheel, but it starts with 5 to 6 basic emotions like happy, sad, angry, and then it branches out from there and it gets more specific. And if you look at that emotion wheel and kind of spread out, eventually you're going to see one of those categories that says motivation. So somebody could look at that and say, that's how I feel right now. I feel motivated. And the significance of that is what we know about all emotion is no emotion's permanent. For better or for worse. They come and they go.
And that actually feels really hopeful and helpful. Mm-hmm. There are going to be seasons where you are wildly motivated and excited about something. And then there are going to be times where you're not. And why do you think that changes? Just that as emotions change, our motivation changes?
Yeah, I think, there's things that you can do to try to increase the likelihood or the accessibility of an emotion. Mm-hmm. So if I want to experience more joy in my life, I can do things that I enjoy doing. I can be around people that have a positive outlook. With motivation, there's some things that I can do to increase my emotional experience of it. I can feel motivated. I can listen to some music that's upbeat. I can go watch a Tony Robbins video.
He'll pump you up.
Yeah, right. I can do some things to pump me up, and that's great. But it's also totally normal to understand that comes and goes.
Yeah.
So we might get into this later, but I think a good alternative to asking how do I stay motivated is probably more along the lines of, how do I build commitment? Because that's a different question altogether.
Oh, that's so important. How do I build commitment versus motivation? Because it's one thing to be motivated, but then to be committed is something different. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? What do you feel like? Because I agree with you. I think I can get amped up and excited about something, but staying committed to it and also having the commitment also to follow through with it is something totally different.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely different. So I don't remember where I first heard this, but it's a concept that I love and I use it in sessions all the time, that when we experience an emotion is something that's measured in seconds or minutes. From the beginning of this podcast to now, if you were to ask me to name some emotions, I could probably rattle off 5 or 6 pretty quickly that I've already had. When an emotion persists into hours, it starts to become a mood. And if that persists into days, maybe weeks, now it's a temperament. Now I'm starting to be known as, that's kind of just the temperament that this person has. And if that goes on for months and years, it's getting pretty ingrained. It's almost personality at that point. So the reason
we go from, start it again, the process.
So an emotion to a mood, to a temperament, to personality.
Okay. Wow. That's actually really helpful.
Yeah.
To think of that, like within ourselves or others around us. Like, this is just an emotion. Oh, wait, this is actually switching to a mood. Actually, now this feels like a temperament, right?
Yep.
Actually, I was telling my husband that. I said, this person I know, it seems like her go-to is just complaining. Just complain. And I wonder if it started as emotion, maybe, and then transitioned to a mood, and now to a temperament. Like, that's just kind of how she is now.
It becomes habitual.
Yeah,
Side of kind of our set point, right?
Yeah.
And you're making a good point that, like, we can think of that in terms of, like, are there things that are less attractive or less positive that I'm doing that can persist? But the opposite's also true. So coming back to your question of how do you develop commitment, that's like letting motivation persist over time. And so as it persists from just an emotion that I experience to now it's a mood, it's a temperament, to it's starting to become more of my personality, that I'm committed with certain things. And there's ways to go about building that. But that's, I think, just such a hopeful thing that it's like you can develop that commitment over time as a result of small emotional experiences that last a moment, and you continue building on that. We can get into like what builds that commitment.
I actually love that idea, because that feels like, oh, this is something I can work on, like, versus I have it or I don't. This is something I can build. And also the same principle, right? I can build some of the negative things, but if I choose to be aware of it, then maybe I don't have to actually have that as my temperament. It's just an emotion. It doesn't change and go to my mood or to my temperament. I think that's really helpful. And, as this person asked this question, one of the things was, how can I be interested in life again? And, I thought, how do we differentiate between, like, what's depression versus what is just lack of motivation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we just talked about, like, motivation being an emotional experience. And I think for some of our listeners, they might resonate with that it's like, I can really recall times when I've been pumped up about something. And whether it's, I'm going to change my eating habits, or I'm going to do some things to address an addiction that I've been struggling with, or whatever it might be. Like, I resonate with that. There's a video, I see something inspiring, I see somebody else make a change, and I feel pumped up, and then it kind of wanes, right? Others might be hearing that and having a harder time thinking about an experience they've had where they felt kind of that firelight within them. And I think that's such a good question you're asking, that, like, if I'm having a difficult time accessing that emotion, period, like, it's not that it comes and it goes, it's just I cannot access that, we may be looking at more something like depression.
So it's like not accessible. It's not even that, it's like lost from us. And that's maybe where we need to look at, like, something, and as you were talking, I thought, is lack of motivation always a bad thing? And there's a part of me that thinks, I wonder if our bodies sometimes say, I'm overwhelmed, this is too much. And actually, we're going to pull back. So we're not going to be overdoing it in the meetings or in our exercise routine or whatever it is. We're actually just going to kind of conserve and reserve some of that energy, emotional or physical, whatever it might be, to maybe help us. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think when you're trying to build commitment over time, not getting overzealous with something that you feel a high amount of motivation in a moment to do. And then you go burn yourself out, right? You set goals that are just unattainable or unrealistic, or you work too hard and it burns out over time. So there's a consistency. But I think that is our body telling us when we reach that point of this isn't working, that motivation will drop, right? We'll feel that.
So it's our body talking to us. It's an indicator, like something needs to change.
It might be going too fast, or I just need to slow down.
And I think that's such a great reminder. Like, this is our body's natural response system, just letting us know that something's out of alignment and that we maybe need to reevaluate where we're spending our time and energy. I mean, to me, that feels so hopeful as well. Like, we're not meant to be at this peak of motivation all the time.
Right.
Like, it ebbs and flows, and that's okay. Now, when it becomes hard to even grasp, or we can't attain it, we can't get to it, then maybe we need to look at it. And look at it a little deeper. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. So, as you think about it, how do you think people find purpose again? As I'm listening to this, like interested in life again, this sounds like somebody who maybe is lacking some purpose. What are your thoughts on that?
I have several. I think first is, this can also tie into what we just talked about with burnout too, but really understanding why I'm motivated to do something. Like what's the drive behind it? Because sometimes it can come from a place of shoulds or ought tos. Like a good person should do this, a healthy person ought to do that. And if we're coming at it from that perspective, really our motivation is for something other than like an internal desire that we have. It might be to please somebody else or, to look like we're doing the right thing. And
by the way, really quickly, I think that's really hard to differentiate sometimes. Like we live in a world where there's a lot of people pleasing going on. So differentiating between what do I want versus what is society telling me, my culture, my family, my work telling me I should be doing. Gosh, that's hard to differentiate.
Yeah, it is. Because as human beings, we're wired for connection. And so there's some goodness to it. I don't want to demonize the fact that there's some motivation to want to do things that, maybe increase my likability with somebody. Like that's human, right? Like we're wired for that. And we notice when we do something that's maybe out of alignment. And so there is some good to feeling like I want to be motivated to do things that build that. But when I'm doing it only for that external validation and it's not connected to something deeper for me, I'm going to burn out over time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Like it has to be connected to something deeper. That's the key as I'm hearing that. Like it has to not just be externally motivated, but this matters to me, right? I mean, I think about when I talk to clients about their values, what matters to you? And they'll say, well, this and this and this. And I say, but is that you, or is that what you've been told? Or is that what that you should do, or what feels right, your parents or your culture or whatever? It's sometimes challenging to get really drill down, get to the depths of like, actually, this is what matters to me. Not what I've been told, not what actually gets me accolades or connection, but that's what matters to me.
Yes. Yeah. It is hard to drill down to that. There's a tool that I'll use in sessions sometimes that can do that, if you'd like to hear it.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I think this actually came from Simon Sinek.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever read any of his stuff. It's a really cool exercise where if you sit for a minute and think about important events in your life, and his advice is to try to think about ones that were meaningful in a positive way. Although it's okay if a couple maybe negative events creep in, like something that I didn't like that happened to me but was still significant, but to try to focus on the positives and to make a list, take an inventory, like things that in my life have made a difference or had an emotional impact on me. And then after inventorying those, he invites people in a second column to go through and write why it was important, right? So what did this event mean to me? Why was it important? And it's so cool doing this with people because he suggests that this will happen, but when I do this in session, it's cool because you see it happen. Themes start to emerge. And so people will start to notice that like all these different events, when I look at why they were important, there's a theme in the why, right? Because I value a certain thing. And that can be so insightful to helping us to understand like what helps me to get passionate about life again. Like what is that why that drives me as an individual? And you can tie that back to all kinds of things, right? That whether it's work or my marriage or like ways that I'm showing up in the world in other categories. Like if I understand my why, that can help me to reconnect to what I'm doing in those different situations.
Gosh, that is so, I'm going to use that actually.
It's cool.
I think that is so helpful because then it's like, instead of this nebulous, like what matters to you, like actually, it matters to you because there's important events in your life that you can draw back to and say, oh, that was important. And this is why it was important to me. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Really helpful. So, and I want to get back to what we talked about. Just again, finding purpose, like finding purpose in life when somebody feels emotionally flat. Like, what is it that you feel like a person can do? Because again, I think it's tricky. Like, I know as therapists, anxiety is one thing that I'm like, oh, I got that down. Like I was born anxious. I know how that goes. But depression is a little bit trickier for me. I feel like I'm wired to like anxious. So to kind of lack that and kind of be on the other side of it is sometimes challenging, especially when it's like, okay, here's the homework. We're going to talk about this in session. Here's what I'm going to give you to do. But sometimes just even getting the motivation to do that thing is hard, right?
Yeah.
To do the one thing. So what do you suggest if that's the case?
So I'm going to call this the shame apathy trap that we fall into. That I think drives a lot of that depression and lack of purpose. So if I am mainly motivated because of those shoulds that we talked about, or I just feel like there's expectation, I have to measure up. I have to prove my worth. I have to prove my lovability to others. And so like I better, darn it, like I better get motivated to do things because that's like I have to prove to other people that I'm worth their time or love or interest. That can set us up for the shame apathy trap where we fall short of marks that either we've set for ourselves or we feel like others have set for us, and we negatively compare ourselves. Addiction's a great example. So many times I've been in a session with somebody who's tried everything they can think of and more. And maybe they've had therapists that have given them all kinds of ideas for things you can do to change this behavior. They try it for a while, it fails eventually, and they start believing, I can't do this. And then that shame of like, it's because I'm broken. It's because I don't want it enough. That's another interesting one. Like the thought that if I just wanted it enough, I would do it. That's not necessarily true either.
Right.
But it creates this apathy that it's like at some point, like what we know about shame is we can't sit in it forever. It's intolerable. And so we either have to like do something that proves to ourselves, at least for a time, that we are worthy and it reduces that shame feeling, or we have to numb from it, or we have to convince ourselves that we don't actually care. And so that's where the apathy comes in, and the depression. Like, I don't actually care about this.
Let's go through that one more time, those steps. I think that's so helpful. Can you mention those one more time?
Absolutely. So we go from feeling the pressure of having to prove ourselves, prove our worth or lovability, to failed attempts to do so, whether because it's actually not working or we're just telling ourselves that it's not working, that I'm not enough. And then when we're met with that failure, we experience the emotion of shame. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy or lovable enough. And shame is not an emotion we can sit in forever. So then we have a few options with that. You can numb from it. You can fake it, try to pretend like I have something that I don't to prove my worth or lovability. Or I can convince myself that it's actually not something I really care about.
Oh my gosh. I don't know why that feels like such a big deal, what you just said, because it helps me to really conceptualize like, wait, where does this come from? Right? Like, if I'm trying to prove myself and then I've had failed attempts, that's so painful. I go into this shame, right? And then I have to get out of the shame somehow. And this is my way of doing it. Like, as you're talking, I think this is so adaptive, right? So instead of just saying I'm broken, this isn't working, I don't have any motivation, actually, this is totally adaptive. Like, this is your body saying, this feels too painful and I'm figuring out a way to get out of this discomfort. So this is the way of doing it. But what do we see on the outside? All we see is, oh, they're just pretending, they're lazy, they're numbing, they're addicted. But like, if you roll it back, boy, you see the why behind it all.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. What's that called again that you just named it?
The shame apathy trap.
The shame apathy trap.
When
I
let
love
shame
that.
persist, apathy follows.
Shame apathy trap. Okay, excellent. I think that's the part I love about our jobs is it's like people come with these frustrating behaviors that aren't serving them well, that are ruining relationships, that are damaging. And when you have something like you just shared, it really helps you to go, oh my gosh, it makes sense. I make sense, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like I'm broken, that something's wrong with me. It's like, actually, this makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And I think when you have those moments with clients, it is like, this is why I do the work I do, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it feels so like, oh my gosh, you just shed light on something that I've been frustrated with for so many years, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Good. So let's talk about, you talked about shame. And I think sometimes there's shame-driven productivity. Like mm-hmm. that we're in a culture that just says, go, 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 do. This is what, performance production is what makes you worthy, is what gets you money. It's what makes you successful. So how do you see the difference between discipline and shame-driven productivity?
Really good question. Well, shame doesn't exist in a vacuum, meaning like it's a relational experience. And so it has that element of like proving that worth to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts to, we lose that sort of like intrinsic drive, like you use the word discipline, and it starts to become less about our values and more about an outcome. Somebody's approval, a promotion, a raise, something like that.
How do we even know that though? Do you think that often we just are going through the motions and we really don't even know why it feels the way it feels?
I think absolutely. A lot of times we go through the motions and it's habitual. We're just used to it.
Totally.
So we kind of have to break out of the box and look at what we're doing and why we're doing and have that self-awareness to start to see like, oh yeah, this is more of that. I'm hustling for my worth. I'm hustling for my love, like my lovability. It's not actually coming from a place of something I truly desire. Yeah. And a huge part of that, like another thing that when I'm having these discussions with clients that we'll get into and talk about, is a way to start piecing, like just what's the word? Yeah, piecing that apart is to look at the difference between goals and values. So this is huge when you realize this, that oftentimes the things that we're doing to measure our worth are goal oriented. And the difference between that and a true value is that goals are things that once you accomplish them, you can check that box. Like that's done. A value is something that never gets checked off of a list. So example, I value kindness, and there's maybe certain things that I have in my mind of like goals that I have to serve others, to teach that to my kids, etc. So it might be like, once a month or a quarter, whatever, we might want to go do a service project. That's our goal. And we go do that project, you can check that box. Say, yep, we did that. But that doesn't mean I wake up the next morning and say, I don't need to think about being kind anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that persists. And so when you start to look at that and think, what's really like driving my performance here? Is it because there's a goal I'm trying to attain? Or is it because there's a value underneath that that's part of my why? Like that it's part of what, just coming back to the word motivation, motivates me as a person.
That makes so much sense. So as you were saying it was almost like I was picturing the umbrella being my values, and underneath that, my goals would be underlying that. And then those are action items. Mm-hmm. But overarching is my values are what are driving me, and then my goals are kind of the action items. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Like to think of it this way, you've probably been on a road trip with your kids.
Yes.
And so what I'm about to share, like you'll probably identify pretty quickly, like, yep, I've had kids that have been in both camps. So a few years ago, we took a road trip to Disneyland. For my daughter, she was excited to go on a trip with her family to Disneyland. And that started the moment she started thinking about the plan for it. My son was excited to go on a trip with his family to Disneyland, which sounds the same, but it started the moment he walked through the gates.
Interesting.
Right? So, and there's
Very
a difference,
different,
right?
Yeah. How was he in the car is what I want to know.
Yeah. And you probably know where I'm going with
Yeah.
this because you've had this experience. He was the one that's in the back seat. Are we there yet? This is boring. When are we going to be, to California? Like all those questions. And my daughter had a very different vibe. I love them both. This isn't this isn't like a critique of him, but for her, the drive was part of the experience. So she's looking out the window, counting animals and playing games, and she's excited about that part of the experience too. That's the difference between goals and values. Is for my son, he had a goal, Disneyland. For my daughter, it was the value of having fun. And we don't necessarily have to be at the theme park for that to start. So,
that's such a good example, Grant. And how do you teach your son now to value traveling to California, right?
Yeah, that's the question.
I do think that is such a great reminder if we are just goal focused, right? Until I reach this goal, until I get through the doors of Disneyland, nothing else really matters, right? Until I reach this point in my career, with my children, with my weight, whatever it is, then I'm not okay. But if we can value the process, then we can actually enjoy it more, right? I would imagine her experience was night and day different than his experience getting there. Yeah. Right?
100% it was. 100%.
And what's interesting is, again, I'm sure neither one of them even knew like that this is what mattered to them versus, what mattered to her versus what mattered to him, right?
Yep.
Probably had no idea. Yep. But kind of getting clear about that is helpful and actually just saying, what are my values? And if I'm living in my values, working towards my values, then the goals are awesome, but that's not the end all be all.
Yeah. And to add to that, if we don't meet the goal, it doesn't destroy me.
Oh, huge. That's huge. Because how often does that happen? Do we fall short of the goal and we are like destroyed? The truth is, if we're still living in our values, then that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? And our motivation can still be intact because, that's a goal and it didn't work out or, it wasn't quite what we hoped for, but I'm still living in my values and that matters.
Yep.
Yeah. Such a good reminder. Grant, I have loved this conversation and I think it's so valuable. I think so many people can benefit from this. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you're like, that is super important, I need to talk about that?
I think we covered a lot of it. I think I just, what I would want to say, what I would want our listeners to know is, again, just that motivation comes and goes, but developing that inner commitment, which comes from understanding what are my true values, is the way to maintain that over time and take it from being just an emotional experience where I have the ups and downs with it to it's more of who I am at my core.
Yes.
Right.
Such a good reminder. I want to go back to what you said, that we start with emotion, it goes to mood, and then I think you said disposition, or what was it?
Disposition or temperament.
Temperament.
Both work.
And then it eventually can become personality. Is that right?
Yep.
Did I get those steps right?
That's right.
Such a good reminder. So be aware of those emotions. They're going to come and go. But when they become mood or temperament, then we might need to just take a real hard look and say, am I going to be that complainer, or am I going to be that who do I want to be? Because essentially emotions come and go, but temperament and personality often is a product of what we continue to perpetuate, what we continue to, what we feed is what grows, right?
Exactly.
So I love that reminder. I also appreciated the idea of getting clear about our values and how we can figure that out. I am going to use what you talked about. Going back to events, why was it important to you? Why did it matter to you, right? Even sometimes the hard ones, and getting really clear about those, because then we can go back to, it mattered, therefore that's a value of mine. I mean, I keep thinking of like the old VHS videos, rewinding. That's what that feels like to me. Like we're going to rewind and figure out like, why does this matter and what's going on, right? Speaking of rewinding, that shame apathy trap, I think that is such a good rewind on behaviors, right? We see the behaviors, but we're going to rewind the video and say, okay, why? Because we have tried to prove ourselves. We had failed attempts to do so. And when we fail, we have what? We have shame. And so because we can't sit in shame, we numb, we pretend. What else do we do?
or we convince ourselves we don't care.
Convince ourselves we don't care. Oh my gosh. I went to Wicked with my son a couple of weeks ago, and Fierro, I don't know if you're familiar with the play, but he sings that song, Dancing Through Life, mindless and careless. And one of the lines is, life is fraughtless. Let's see. Yes. Life is fraughtless when you're thoughtless. Those who don't try never look foolish. And I just kept thinking about that. Like, oh, you can say he's so apathetic. He's so lazy. Wait a minute. Actually, he's just protecting, right? Like he can't be in that shame anymore. And so that's where he is, right?
Such a great example.
Yeah. If I could remember the lyrics, it'd even be better.
That's a great example.
Good. And then goals versus values. That values are that overlying, that's the bigger picture, and our goals are the action items. And that even if we don't reach that goal, that we can still live in our values.
Yes.
And remember your daughter and son. I thought that was such a great example of, where the value lies, and it really is predictive of our experience, right? So thank you so much. I really hope that this episode was helpful for our listeners. I really feel like so many of us experience motivation, and motivation changes, right? It comes and goes. It's an emotion. And to recognize that it may not be missing. It may be missing for just a time, but maybe it's buried under exhaustion, or it's, expectations, or it's a season of life. And to recognize that they will come and go, and hoping that this episode will help you recognize that you're not broken, but maybe it's just buried for a time, and maybe there's purpose there. And to use some of these tools that Grant has talked about to help you reclaim some of that motivation. And when it's lost, to maybe just get curious, what's going on for you, and why is it buried for that season? As always, we appreciate you joining us for this episode. If you feel like this would be helpful, and I think it would be for so many people, please share it with your loved ones and friends. And it is always helpful in our podcast if you like and subscribe, if you're on YouTube, or if you're on any of your streaming devices, to leave a comment and to rate and review. That's always helpful for us. Until next time, take care.